This film employs dramatic reenactments. All words spoken by actors are exact quotations, drawn from the interviews, journals, and the memoirs of those who fought. Where the St. Lawrence begins to widen to the sea, on the 10th of November 1950, a strange and terrifying event is about to happen to villages that line the riverbank north of Quebec City. Few villagers still have any idea that the event is a direct link to one of the deepest secrets of the Korean War. On this November day, the story begins at Goose Bay, Labrador. A U.S. Strategic Air Command B-50 bomber takes on a secret cargo. The cargo is the largest bomb in the U.S. arsenal, the Mark IV. With a 9-kilogram nuclear trigger, this becomes an atomic bomb. The bomb is loaded without the trigger. Nevertheless, the bomb's 3 tons of high explosive makes it bigger than any conventional weapon ever dropped. At the onset of the Korean War 5 months earlier, the U.S. secretly asked Canada for permission to deploy an atomic attack squadron at Goose Bay, only 5 hours flying time from targeted cities in the Soviet Union. The B-50 is returning one of the bombs to its home base in the U.S. when over the St. Lawrence, the aircraft suddenly develops engine trouble. First one engine, then a second. Following emergency procedure, the pilot prepares to jettison the bomb. Setting it to explode at 775 meters. It's 4 p.m., a moment to remember for those below. Newspapers the next day report an earth-shaking explosion, producing a towering column of yellow smoke almost a kilometer high. Villagers report the ground shaking for 40 kilometers in every direction. A cover story is quickly put into place. The authorities lie, saying the flight was routine. The explosion, just a small practice bomb. This is part of the secret history of the Korean War, the camouflage put over the vast and clandestine nuclear battle plan, being readied in case the U.S. and its allies have no other means of winning the war. But before resorting to the bomb, America's most famous general will launch a desperate sea invasion of Korea. This is the South Korean port of Incheon. More than 50 years ago, U.S. Marines were storming this seawall, surprising the communist defenders.
50 years ago, come here, fight.
At Incheon today, a different surprise. A moment of serendipity for visiting veterans. from a class making a school visit to a memorial.
Hey,
His was a dark war, seeing Korean children suffer. And he wasn't much more than a kid himself. So this is a moment to save him.
my name, Donald. You know Donald Duck?
Yeah, Donald.
Donald Gill. Gill.
Don Gill from New England. He was 18
Wow.
and not prepared for what was coming.
I'll show you some pictures. Incheon Seoul Road. This here, coming up the street, is me. Incheon Seoul.
You know MacArthur?
MacArthur, he army.
The soldiers and the children come to see the statue of the controversial General Douglas MacArthur at Incheon. Gill is here with Canadian combat veteran John Bishop.
John,
They shared MacArthur as a commander.
I do not recall MacArthur, maybe did. This looks more like Patan, come in the shore, I have returned, right?
I thought the same, even as a Canadian.
Yeah. A lot of people loved them. A lot of people didn't care for them.
It is fatal to enter any war without the will to win it. In war, you win or lose, live or die. And the difference is just an eyelash.
It is September of 1950. General MacArthur is in Japan at his supreme headquarters for Asia and putting a brave face on it. But the 70-year-old commander is losing the Korean War. MacArthur is preparing a new plan, a bold strategy to turn the war around in Korea. The plan calls for U.S. forces trapped at Busan to be landed at Incheon and surprise the North Korean enemy from behind. It is a risky plan. At Incheon, the tides are high. They recede, leaving mudflats. If the timing is wrong, this will ground an invasion fleet and make them sitting ducks. MacArthur dismisses the danger and stakes his reputation. We shall land at Incheon, he declares, and I shall crush them. On the 12th of September 1950, thousands of U.S. troops are filing aboard transports, embarking for Incheon. Bill Childress, poet and soldier, writes about the sensation of going aboard a troop ship.
We wound inward like slaves in some gigantic pyramid, selected by our pharaoh for burial against our wills.
Desperately short of craft for an invasion, the U.S. is using ships and crews from the defeated Japanese Imperial Navy. MacArthur's fleet weathers a Pacific storm, then skillfully negotiates the tide at Incheon, surging ashore in two waves 12 hours apart. Don Gill and the 1st Marines arrived just before dawn and under fire.
We got up against the seawall. We had two wooden ladders. We had to climb up the ladders to get onto the seawall. The first night, my platoon didn't take any casualties. We took 17 to 19 prisoners. I'll show you how green I was. I kept hearing bumblebees. So I said to a Sergeant Evendorf, I said, hey, Sarge, I said, this place is full of bumblebees. Now remember, I'm 18 years old. He said, bumblebees, and he listens for a second, and he hears a bullet ricochet off the ground, and when it tumbles through the air, it sounds like the wings of a bumblebee. He said, you stupid SOB, you're being shot at. Get out of there. So I rolled over to the side of the road and the bumblebees went away.
With Inchon secure, MacArthur comes ashore. His dangerous plan has succeeded brilliantly. There is no premonition that this triumph will be his last hurrah. The landing at Inchon and the U.S. advance has changed the course of the war and is having a deep impact on every Korean. Yu Chun-do is a retired physician living in Seoul, South Korea. But in the autumn days of 1950, she was on the other side, a doctor serving the North Korean army. She joined their cause hoping to build a revolutionary Korea with land reform and an end to feudalism. The new U.S. offensive is shattering her dreams. All across the land, North Korean forces are being bombed and napalmed.
거기에 매일매일 그냥 그 난강의 전투의 부상병을 싣고 옵니다. 그걸 치료를 하다가 거기는 대개는 이제 그 손발을 자르고 발 자르고 탈라점에서 이제 네이판탄 때문에 얼굴이 전부 다 이래 붓고 전부 다 이 부풀어 오는 환자들이 이렇게 그냥 이렇게 와요, 그냥.
Marines are advancing and North Koreans are retreating. Horror is coming.
And I bet you that's ill footing, maybe.
With Canadian combat veteran John Bishop, Don Gill is trying to find the battlefield where the nightmare began.
What's gone are the levees.
He's getting close.
The bridge on that side was blown out. This here would have been a levee, you know, an old earthen levee with a dirt road on top of here. Then they said, 1st Platoon Baker Company, forward.
Don Gill flashes back, remembering every moment entering a Korean cornfield, sensing an enemy is coming, a North Korean enemy that doesn't know the Americans are so near, an enemy known by one word.
The Koreans, we refer to them as boots.
The Marines set up an ambush, and the North Koreans fall right into it. Don Gill and his platoon of 45 men suddenly realize there's more, many more North Koreans coming. Still unaware the Marines are in their path.
We are way outnumbered. The only thing in our favor is they're coming over in 15 and 20 at a time. Everybody gets shot. And we just cut them down. It was merciless. Cut them down. Some would get up and start running into the pond so you couldn't see them. Some would get killed in the cornfield. You look back, all you saw into the cornfields was bodies. Not one of us was wounded. As we go by them, a group we shot, some of them got up in back of us. Now, if they get up in back of us, we're in deep doo-doo.
They have no reinforcements. The Marines now get a grim and bloody assignment: kill the wounded.
Somebody assigned a man to shoot everybody on the ground. When you reshoot a man on the ground, he bounces. The bullet passes through him, hits the ground, ricochets, and comes up through their back, and they bounce up in the air. And this kid, he doesn't want to be doing this. And I got so nervous. I was trembling so bad. I said, shoot him in the head. Shoot him in the head. Shoot them all in the head. And then I said to myself, gee, I said that, you know. And then he starts shooting everybody in the head.
Near the end of the action, 2 North Korean soldiers try to surrender. Gill's friend, Blanchard, is ordered to execute one.
He was trembling, and he said in a low, soft voice, I can't. So we took the 2 prisoners. And then a South Korean Marine unit moved through us. So somebody gave them our 2 prisoners. So around 15 minutes later, 10 minutes, from the back of this hill, you hear, and we all looked at each other, we says, that's the end of those prisoners. What we did, a normal human being wouldn't do it. But our superiors, whether sergeants, lieutenant, he gave the order to protect his men. Because if they got up, we were dead. Nobody committed a war crime. He probably never slept with, I say he, I don't know who said it. He never slept very well since that day, but he gave the right order.
Seoul, the South Korean capital, soon becomes a battleground for Don Gill and the 1st Marine Division. They fight for every street, every building, with combat photographers in the thick of it, trying to capture the action. Marguerite Higgins of the New York Herald Tribune is also there, the only woman war correspondent.
The United States Marines blazed a bloody path into the city. The going was particularly tough for Charlie Company of the 1st Marines in the center of Seoul. We didn't know the road was heavily mined until a medic jeep raced ahead of us. The Jeep blew up directly in our path. Of the three in it, only the medic survived, and his torn body and shredded bloody face were a ghastly sight.
After the massacre, Gill's platoon is in such shock, they march through a minefield, totally oblivious.
Morale is non-existent in the front line. You win a battle, you don't jump up in the air and win number one. Everybody's sad, everybody's grieving, and you just feel lucky that you're breathing. Then as the chain of command goes up, they all get morale and happy because of what you did.
The Marines capture Seoul, and General MacArthur flies in from Japan for the celebration. One officer says he gives it more attention than Incheon, orchestrating the return of Syngman Rhee, complete with a parade to welcome the rightist leader back to the South Korean capital.
I moved at once to have the government of Korea re-established in Seoul. President Rhee clasped my hand and said, "We admire you." Tears streaming down his cheeks. "We love you as the savior of our race."
Rhee is now well positioned to continue a witch hunt against his enemies. In the next 2 years, his regime will execute 100,000 opponents. You lived if you were lucky, you died if you were not, is a line from one of Yu Chun-do's poems. After serving as a doctor in the North Korean army, she is now among refugees, trying to get home.
그 미군들이 있는데 그 앞으로 지나갔는데 이렇게 지나가니까 헤이 베비 어디로 가느냐고 양쪽에서 물어. 그냥 혼자서 그냥 아무도 없는데 이렇게 가고 있으니까 그래서 내가 그냥 그때 투서울 투서울 나는 그때 긴장을 했지만도 웃었는 것 같아요.
She is apprehensive because Syngman Rhee vigilantes are pulling suspected communists from lines of refugees and beating them, often the last stage before summary execution.
갑자기 누가 뒤에서 그냥 꽉 낚아채워요. 빨갱이라고, 너는 빨갱이다, 너는 죽었다. 그러면서 두 발이 날아가는 것 같아. 좀부터 싫다니까. 두 발 날아가는데 세 발째인데 내가 속으로 하나 둘 셋 하고 셋 있다고 하잖아요. 그래가지고는 셋 하면서 이제 내가 맞았는 줄 알고 주저앉는데 누가 그냥 쫓아오는 거라. 그냥 미군들이 한국군을 막 밀치더라고. 한국군을 보고 왜 얘를 죽이느냐고 와 이러면서 그냥 그러니 그러니까 그 묵짓해가지고 커뮤니스트 이러는 거야 나를 보고. 그래가지고는 이제 그때 정신이 나서 I'm not communist, I'm a student. 그 밀치면서 나를 손을 잡고 그냥 자기한테 데리고 가서 자기 있는 대로 저 집차에. 그래가 자기 그 집차 앞에 밤바에다가 나를 이렇게 올려주더라고. 그래 밤바에서 이제 올라갔지. 옛날 밤바가 크나 그게? 집차 밤바 올라가서 이랬으니까 누가 막 초콜릿들을 막 사방에서 갖다 주는 거야 그냥. 그래 초콜릿들을 안고 그냥 막 그때 싸우고 울었다고.
a U.S. propaganda film, tells a similar story.
Candy, chewing gum for the kids. But you have to teach them how to eat it. Poor frightened little fellows.
Most of the soldiers see a different war. In his battle, Donald Gill remembers a child orphaned in the Cornfield Massacre.
I passed a woman laying face down, and she's full of bullet holes, and sitting at her head is a little girl. And the little girl's left arm is gone. So our Navy corpsman, I called him. I said, there's a kid here, you better take care of her. And she's one of these cute little Oriental children with the hair cut, you know, how that, and she's looking up at me like this, sitting down, and as I go, she just looks, she doesn't cry, she isn't moaning, and she just watches me walk by. And I just continue down with the group. To this day, I often wondered what happened to that little girl.
In the Korean War, the suffering of the children is terrible to behold, a theme echoed by the soldier-poet Bill Childress.
They line the road like broken stalks. Children with bellies swollen, and all the flowers of their faces, petals all torn, and the rags of their threadbare clothes. Mother, we give them everything in our packs and still bemoan so sadly. More, with eyes of stone. These kids will never sing again. Oh, Mother, wish me home. With just one field of Kansas grain, what I can do for them.
North Korean history speaks of a glorious fighting withdrawal after the Incheon landing and their defeat in Seoul.
40km.
Kim Tae-hwa was a 23-year-old battalion commander.
상륙하고 인천에서 서울까지 70이란 말이야. 근데 14일도 안 들어왔단 말이야. 우리한테 저항받다니까. 그간에 낙동강 전선 나가던 주력 부대가 쭉 빠져 들어왔지. 이북으로.
Even in retreat, the North Korean army is a dangerous fighting force, as Donald Gill and his company of Marines are about to discover.
So we start down the dirt road. The first three guys leading go down, they get shot. And the Staff Sergeant Brink, he's right behind us, he's laying on the ground, you know, flat on the ground. And I don't know what happened to his mind, because he left his carbine on the ground, he stood up, he grabbed his stomach like this, and he says, ho, 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 they can't shoot me. The second he said that, boom, he goes over. We can hear him grunting. So Holloway says to me, let's get him. Holloway gets back to Brink and he bends over to pick him up. When he bends over, He gets shot through one cheek, comes out the other cheek. He comes down looking at me. He says, "Stay there, Gill." Turns around again, grabs Brink. He drags Brink back. And he's mad. He's ripping. Bullet comes in under here, goes through his nasal passage, top of his roof, through his mouth, and comes out underneath his cheekbone. Didn't touch a bone. So Holloway says to me, "Don," he says, "would you go into that building and see if we can use it?" I run over into the building, and they're firing traces through the building. It's coming in one side, going out the other. Now, I got to build up courage to run back in the middle of that back to Holloway and tell him it's no good.
Not realizing the peril, more Marines are right behind Gill.
I said, "Whoa, don't come in here. Don't bring your men in here. It's a death trap." He brings all his men in there. Flanagan, Bourne, and Bruno. Bourne and Bruno are 18 years old. The kid who stood up the longest, he gets shot. The other kid, 18 years old, he gets scared. He jumps up. He gets shot. He fell to the ground. He said one word. He said, "Carmen," and he died. Now we're in a building we can't get out of. Before the day ends, just about everybody in that building, including me, gets shot. We get back to the cornfield. We carry the wounded to the helicopters, and they carry them out.
US, UN, and Korean casualties are mounting fast. The US alone has more than 15,000 dead, wounded, and missing, and the war is not yet 90 days old. China, at the summer residence of the leader, the mood is somber. Mao Zedong receives reports that UN forces are preparing to invade North Korea and threaten China. Mao chooses neutral India as a messenger, warning the West that any attack on North Korea will be seen as an attack on China. Jubilant and confident after the Incheon landing, the US administration now feels invulnerable. The President and his Secretary of State pay little heed to warnings from China. Military historian Bin Yu.
They treated Chinese official warnings as bluffing. These are either propaganda or those communicators like the Indian ambassador to Beijing. They were actually pro-communist. How could you trust this guy? So Washington dismissed those warnings, but those warnings turned to be real.
General MacArthur has been authorized by Washington to expand the war into North Korea, but to do so without provoking China. MacArthur, on the other hand, intends to conduct an unrestricted invasion.
My mission is to clear out all North Korea, to unify it, and to liberalize it.
Even before Washington gives the go-ahead, Syngman Rhee's army crosses the 38th parallel, invading North Korea. MacArthur's army is right behind. Loads of infantry and heavy tanks moving north. By early October, US-led forces are advancing through the mountains on a divided front, moving towards the Yalu River, the border with China. In China, preparations are underway for war with the United States. It is an immense decision, not lightly taken. Nothing alarms the Chinese more than the threat of the atomic bomb. The US is repeatedly testing the doomsday weapon in the Pacific. The threat of the bomb is keeping the Soviet Union at arm's length from the war. But China decides the threat must be faced. Leading the assessment is one of China's top young commanders, General Duping.
我们的结论是，决定战争胜负的是人，而不是那么一两颗原子弹。在战场上使用原子弹，不仅对我们有害，对使用他们的美军也不利。还有，面对世界反对原子弹的舆论，美国政府在使用它们之前，必然会再三考虑的。
Chinese units secretly begin to move into Korea, traversing the Yalu at night, on special bridges built just below the surface of the water. To minimize their intervention, the Chinese call their soldiers entering Korea volunteers. While the Chinese army deploys, Foreign Minister Zhou Enlai is dispatched to Moscow to secure arms, and most critically, Soviet air support against US air power. Soviet leader Joseph Stalin greets him as a comrade, but he gives the Chinese little. Unwilling to confront the United States, Stalin promises guns, but no air support inside Korea.
It was shocking to Mao. On October the 12th, Mao, as soon as he received the cable from Moscow, he halted the Chinese military kind of crossing the Yalu River.
Finally, Mao concludes that if China does not fight the US in Korea, sooner or later, the US will invade China, attempting to destroy the Chinese Revolution. So with or without air support, fight they must. The 14th of October, 1950. Unaware the Chinese are already in Korea, President Harry Truman flies to Wake Island in the Pacific to meet General MacArthur. They have big smiles, but Truman notes that the general is shaking his hand, not saluting his commander-in-chief. Truman privately calls MacArthur a brass hat, who sees himself as the right hand of God, and is worried MacArthur might widen the war all by himself. Truman asks the general about the Chinese.
I replied that no Chinese military commander would hazard the commitment of large forces on the Korean Peninsula. The risk of their utter destruction would be too great.
It is a moment of destiny, a tale of great folly. Blinded by pride, MacArthur has set in motion a series of now irreversible events that will change the history of China, inflict a great defeat on the United States, and reverse the tide of the Korean War. In the Korean mountains, there is no doubt the Chinese have arrived and are beginning to link up with the North Korean army. The North Koreans are astonished at their first glimpse of their new allies. At that moment, Kim Dok-ho is a 25-year-old captain in the Korean People's Army.
당시에 중국 지형물은 소모사 지고 견장도 그 모자도 이렇게 쓰고 그 총만 메고 야, 저 어떻게 저런 기울이 있는가 했더니 내적 기울은 강철 같은 기울이. 외적인 거는 굉장히 없지만 그 사람 특징이 뭐냐? 상관과 전후에 동제가 아주 강한 군대였다는 걸 내가 느꼈다고.
A Chinese propaganda film captures a remarkable scene. A marching band launches the next wave of Chinese troops into Korea. A peasant army, their strength in numbers, crossing the Yalu River, now frozen into an ice highway. Well inside Korea, U.S. soldiers capture some of the lead elements. The Chinese soldiers are interrogated. They reveal they are from regular units of the Chinese 39th Army. General MacArthur is briefed on this and a mounting number of intelligence reports. He refuses to believe them. He says the Chinese must be volunteers fighting on their own. On the 24th of November 1950, MacArthur flies over North Korea and along the Yalu River to reconnoiter for himself. What he sees makes him confident. There is no sign of the Chinese.
All that spread before our eyes was an endless expanse of utterly barren countryside. Jagged hills, yawning crevasses, and the black waters of the Yalu, locked in the silent death grip of snow and ice.
MacArthur sees nothing of China's immense army, 375,000 strong, now hiding in the mountains below. MacArthur makes a bold prediction. The war will be over, he says, by Christmas.
Now, there's nothing did more for our morale that gave us more joy than that one sentence. You'll be home by Christmas.
The Chinese are now confident of surprise. Maintaining an air of normalcy, Mao doesn't miss his usual Saturday night step around a Beijing dance floor. Mao has made a personal commitment to the Korean cause. His number one son, 28-year-old An Ying, is leaving for Korea to join the staff at the Army's field headquarters. In the skies, U.S. planes are on guard, hunting for enemy units. They get lucky.
Mao's son was, I think, stay in a hut, the Korean peasant farmer's house, home, and was destroyed. The airplane used napalm or others that's burned. It's very effective. Mao's son was killed, but I think Mao took it as quite, something that happened. It happened. You cannot commit your son to a battlefield, knowing he will be happily returned without. But it was a bad thing for Mao.
By all accounts, the death of his son is a great blow to the Chinese leader. But if anything, this stiffens Mao's resolve. At that moment, the Chinese army is moving into final positions for an attack that will stun and surprise the U.S., almost on the scale of Pearl Harbor. China's generals now have a strategy to confront the UN army.
我们估计到他们会害怕夜战，害怕短兵相接，那我们就可以利用朝鲜的山脉打这两下。
On Tuesday, the 27th of November, in 23 below zero weather, the Chinese Army and North Korean forces attack all along the front. So sudden and so colossal is the assault, the US and other UN forces begin an immediate and desperate retreat.
I think in Mao's mind, if you really want to stop the war, you really want to have a victory, you have to wipe out American units.
In the snow, in the cold, US forces gather their frozen dead. A retreat begins. A deep withdrawal, in the words of one US general. The official US history of the war does not shade its judgment, calling it the biggest and most humiliating retreat in US history. Reporter Marguerite Higgins saw it happen.
It has been a Korean Valley forge, and worse than anything in Marine history. The terrible trek through the mountains cost more lives than Iwo Jima. There are nearly 5,000 Army and Marine casualties, including dead, missing, wounded, or frostbite cases. Never brush off the word frostbite. To many Marines, frostbite means amputated fingers, toes, feet, and legs.
The calamity shakes the US military leadership. MacArthur is unfazed and goes on the attack. Now that China is in the war, he declares, the US should use its ultimate weapon, the atomic bomb.
It is my belief that if allowed to use my full military might without artificial restriction, I could not only save Korea, but inflict such a destructive blow upon Red China's capacity to make aggressive war that it would remove her as a further threat to peace in Asia for generations to come.
As the president who ordered the dropping of atomic bombs on Japan only 5 years earlier, Truman is conscious of the searing impact and determined not to go down in history as the man who did it again. He's also concerned now that the Soviets have the bomb, they might retaliate. He vetoes MacArthur's demand. But MacArthur and many US leaders continue to agitate for the use of the ultimate weapon against what another US commanding general calls the Asiatic hordes.
I think the US side in general viewed Chinese communist government as perhaps the worst type of communism. They were not only communists, they were yellow communists. Yellow, those like Mongol threatening. So you can say this has some traces of racism.
Act 1 of the war ends, but the nightmares of those who fought it have only begun.
I love you.
I love all you guys. Marines. I'm looking for my friend.
Oh, your friend?
He died.
They are ghosts now, most of the teenage Marines who went to war with Donald Gill. He can't get some scenes out of his mind. The night before their terrible battle stands out. They were around a campfire, dreaming of home. Gill remembers drinking from a metal cup that burned his lips. Gill figures that this was the last hour of his life, that he was at peace with himself. For at daybreak, all the boys went out and killed the soldiers they called gooks, guys just about the same age as they were. Shot them through the chest and through the head as they lay in the corn, everybody following orders.
I first wrote a story about that day in 1950. I entitled the story, No Time for Prisoners. That has been a nightmare all my life. When you're taking life for really no rational reason, to watch it in a movie or on a theater is one thing, but to be part of it, when you don't want to be part of it. But if him and I in battle, and he's the enemy, I have no choice but to kill him, because if I don't, he may kill me.
Yu Chun-do is tormented too. So many of her comrades died, and she has lived a long life.
나는 한동안에 헤어나지를 못했지.
Before she dies, she wants to pay a debt. It is to the U.S. sergeant who saved her life, because he said he had 2 daughters just like her.
그래서 언젠가 그런 생각을 선생님한테 했나, 언젠가 한 만났으면 좋겠다. 그 만약에 그 나이가 들었으니까 죽었으면 그 딸들이라도 만났으면 하는 생각이 했다고.
They are only a handful of victims from only the first 9 months of the war. And it is only getting rolling. The big battles, bigger than Gettysburg, bigger than Normandy, bigger than Stalingrad, are still to come. The sound of the guns will also signal the downfall of the American Caesar, MacArthur.